So, good morning to everyone. I'm Nancy Guerra, and I am the Dean of the wonderful School of Social Ecology, and I want to welcome you all here this morning, and kudos to you for getting here this early in the morning. We really appreciate it. We have a great presentation today. I first want to just thank our change makers, which is our alumni and supporter association of folks who really help support the Dean's Excellence Fund and enable us to do all kinds of amazing things for our students and in the community and actually in the world. So thank you so much, and I want to thank Doug and Jason and Patricia, our development and communication staff, who worked tirelessly and got here even earlier than me. Somehow I had the time wrong and I got here at 5 to 7, so they were here. So thank them. Today is our first Daybreak Dialogue for the academic year. We have 3 a year, so I hope you'll attend all of them. And we are so fortunate to have Professor Pete Ditto. I'll tell you a little bit about him, but then I'm going to let him tell you about all of his interesting work. He did his undergraduate at UCLA. I don't know, we weren't there at the same time, but my alma mater. And his MA and PhD from Princeton. His research is very interesting and very timely. He looks at motivated reasoning, which, if you think about it, how the desire to reach a particular conclusion biases how you process information. So think about that in your own life, and we'll hear more about it today. And he's looked at how these biases play a role in responses to threatening medical information, end-of-life decision-making, and now in particular, he's looking, and this is so timely, it's scary, how people selectively recruit general principles and factual beliefs to support their desired conclusions. In particular today, we're going to be hearing about partisan political bias, and I think no matter what political persuasion you are from, you have to agree that that is the most relevant topic as we come into this November election. So without further ado, I'm so honored and pleased to present Pete Ditto.
I think I'm mic'd up. Thank you, Nancy. And thanks, everybody, for coming. I appreciate people being here so early. So what I want to talk to you about today is politics and morality. My mom told me never to talk about those things and play company, so we're going to start off talking a little bit about sports. So this is a little clip of John McEnroe, the tennis player, in his sort of iconic moments.
It was the wrong side.
The ball short came up all over.
No, it was a bit of a spread, Mr. McEnroe. That was a good call.
Excuse me?
That was a bit of a spread.
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious! That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up. It was clearly in. Can you possibly call that?
I'm going to award a point against you, Mr. McEnroe.
So John McEnroe was one of my favorite tennis players when I was a kid, but he was probably best known for these tantrums, right? And what I want you to see there is, here's this guy. He's watching this event as everybody else is. He sees that ball. He sees it go in, and he cannot believe that anybody else could see the world differently than him, and it makes him furious. You cannot be serious that you can see the world differently than I did. And for what I want to talk to you about today is that this is sort of the representation of what's going on in politics today, right? The same sort of thing. We go back to just recent history, the Kavanaugh hearings. We see the same event play out, right? Different people watch it, they perceive it differently. So I saw this. This is a poll that happened right afterwards. So who do you believe? Percentage of people believing Ford or Kavanaugh told the truth. You look at Democrats, 73% of them think that Ford told the truth. Republicans, 74% of them think Kavanaugh told the truth. Independents are right in the middle, right? They see it up the middle. It's not just this, though, right? So you just go back to the Merrick Garland appointment. So should the Senate have voted on Merrick Garland or waited for a new president? 69% of Democrats say he they should vote on him. 72% of Republicans say they shouldn't, and independents are right in the middle. Other kinds of things, right? You could just do this on almost everything. So was weather more extreme in the past few years or about the same? Democrats all think it was more extreme. Republicans think it was about the same. Independents right in the middle. How about police? Are they tougher on blacks or do they treat whites and blacks the same? Democrats think they're tougher on blacks. Republicans think they're about the same. Independents right in the middle. How about, did Donald Trump know that his campaign had contact with Russians? Democrats say yes, Republicans say no, independents right in the middle. Everybody's watching the same event, right? And perceiving it completely differently, right? You could just go on, and not just on, these aren't just opinions, right? These are factual beliefs. Did the weather get worse? How do police treat African Americans? Did Donald Trump know? These are factual beliefs, right? So this is sort of the phenomenon that I want to talk about today, right? So these alternative facts that seem to be dominating our political landscape. So this is our political world, right? You've got these two sides, deeply different moral sensibilities, right? They watch the world, they see it completely differently. They come up with these alternative beliefs. Those beliefs just make them more angry, right? That just feels, how can you believe that? You cannot be serious, and the whole thing fuels itself in this sort of partisan conflict where nothing gets done and everybody just fights. And so I want to sort of decompose that a little bit today, talk about how we got here, and maybe, if I have time, a little bit about how, at least how we might think about fixing it. There's three processes that I want to talk about as contributing to this dilemma that we're in. These sort of forces that create polarization: moralization, factualization, and socialization. Moralization turns teams into tribes. Factualization turns opinions into facts. Socialization turns individual beliefs into socially validated truths, right? And together, these processes sort of conspire to create this conflict and polarization. So let me bring in moralization. So politics should be about moral vision, right? What's right and wrong and how to realize that vision with some sort of public policy. But it seems that our politics are particularly moralized now, right? So we have the issues that we fight about a lot, things like abortion, same-sex marriage, all kinds of things about how we treat, how women are treated in the world, right? These are moral issues, things about right and wrong, right? But even things that are sort of not particularly moral become sucked into this sort of moral vortex, right? So things like global warming is a moral issue. Poverty is a moral issue, right? And so when you moralize politics, it really changes the way you think about things. So if you think about, there's different ways to talk about issues. You can say, well, gee, here you've got one idea, I've got a different idea. We both have the same goal, but we have a different idea about how to get there. And if it doesn't go well, your idea is kind of dumb and mine's kind of smart, right? But what happens when things become moralized? It's different. It's like you have a solution. Here's your policy. Here's my policy. You have a different intention. Your policy has a different goal. You're trying to take all the money. You're trying to grab power, right? So that the policy then becomes not wrong, but the alternative policy becomes evil, right? It's a matter of right and wrong and evil, and it fuels the conflict. We can see that it's in the Kavanaugh hearing, right? So you can imagine a world in which a confirmation hearing is a calm, pleasant thing, but here it becomes a matter of one side being evil, and both sides do this, right? So it's the alternative view is an evil view, not just an alternative, not just a good idea, bad execution kind of thing, right? So how do we get there? Well, I want to talk a little bit about the moral psychology of liberals and conservatives, because a lot of this just stems from pure natural. There really are moral differences between the way liberals and conservatives see the world. I want to talk about some work I did with John Haidt, who actually is talking at Chapman University later today, who wrote a well-known book called The Righteous Mind. We collaborated. This is really his theory, his moral foundations theory that we worked together on for years. And it starts with this idea that morality is something that we feel more than we think. We have these sort of visceral reactions, and these are evolved reactions, that we have natural reactions that try to suppress selfishness and bring groups together, right? If you look across cultures, there's sort of 5 foundations on which morality is built, right? And these are like, you can think of them like taste buds. They're things that evoke events that evoke certain kinds of moral and emotional reactions, things that make us feel that certain acts are right or wrong, virtuous or vice kind of thing. So here's the 5. Harm, and care. We think that things are wrong if they harm people, particularly if they harm vulnerable people. And taking care of vulnerable people is a good thing. So people who take care of vulnerable people, Mother Teresa, we think are morally good. The things that are particularly bad are hurting vulnerable people, child abuse, spousal abuse, those kinds of things, right? And every culture shares that intuition. Fairness. We have an innate sense of justice, right? Even babies have an innate sense of justice. They think that you should divvy up things fairly, evenly between groups. And then sometimes you've got to reward people if they put in a little bit more. You got to give them a little bit more. So there's both a sense of sort of proportionality and equality, right? And so people who treat people fairly are virtuous. People who don't prejudice, people who freeload are not. In-group loyalty. So we all have this sense of that groups, the loyalty to the group is good, and one of the worst things you could do is betray your group, right? So we have things like Judas Iscariot. We've got Benedict Arnold, right? Those are the worst things. You can't betray your family or your group. These are the things that are the basis of patriotism and family loyalty. Authority and respect. We have, every culture has this sense that the way things are done is sort of the good. There's some homage that you should pay to people in the way tradition dictates things, and authority, the natural authority that people have, and acts that disrespect authority are immoral. And finally, the idea of purity and sanctity. The idea that there are certain states of being that are more pure, or closer to God, in a sense, than others. And you can contaminate yourself. That certain things are wrong by treating your body as a plaything, not a temple. Right? Is this sense that people have that when you things like drug use and other kinds of things, sexual activities can contaminate the soul. Right? So these are these 5 dimensions. The idea is there's these 5 foundations. Everybody's got them. Across cultures you find them, but they get dialed up and dialed down in different cultures. There's certain cultures that weigh, and some cultures that weigh certain of these beliefs more, or these foundations more than others. And we've studied this. This is one of the products of our collaboration is this yourmorals.org website. You can go to this website. We collect data. There's always 20 to 25 surveys up there. You get feedback, tells you about what the surveys are about. And we have a database of about 800,000 people who have been through this. One of the things that we do is we have this moral foundation questionnaire, which measures how much people care about those different foundations I just talked about. And when you look at that, you see a particular pattern that, and when you look at liberals versus conservatives, right? And it looks very much like this. So just to orient you to the graph, so this is just people saying how relevant certain things are to their moral view. And then this is a sort of typical, very liberal to very conservative 7-point political scale, right? And these are just items that measure how much you care, how much harm is relevant to your moral system, fairness, in-group authority, and purity. And you see a particular pattern. So for harm and fairness, everybody thinks those are very important. They're very relevant to their moral view, and those don't differ very much across the political spectrum, right? In-group authority and purity show a different pattern. Liberals don't seem to think these are very moral. They say, no, these aren't really relevant. Group loyalty, whether things are disgusting, whether you adhere to authority, those aren't things that I care about. But conservatives do. They think those are just as important, right, as harm and fairness. So what you get is this pattern where liberals tend to have this 2-factor morality. If it doesn't harm anybody, if it's not unfair, it's not wrong. All these other things are less important. Conservatives have a more 5-factor morality. That's the more traditional one across the globe. It's actually liberal education that sort of, and broadly speaking, that sort of dials down in-group authority, purity as things. But traditionally, those are all 5 things that are important, and political conservatives will rate them all as important. Right? And so you get this, you get to say that this is sort of this moral difference where liberals have this 2-factor morality, conservatives have a 5-factor morality. It helps to understand how we look at lots of different sort of events. You could do this with almost anything. So take something like same-sex marriage. So from a liberal standpoint, it doesn't hurt anybody for same-sex people to get married. And in fact, it hurts them if they don't get married. So it's the harm factor is in their favor. Fairness, it's only fair. It's marriage equality. Everybody should be treated equally. So for liberals, it's unmitigated good, right? So it's a moral good to have same-sex marriage. Now, Conservatives may have some of those same values. They feel those same things, but they also feel other things. So it's, gee, Lincoln, well, why can't you hear, sometimes you hear people say, well, why can't gay people just act like everybody else? Why can't they just be a good group member? Why do they have to act up like that, right? So that's the sense of they're not a good in-group member. They're not traditional, right? Traditional marriage. It seems to violate the sense of, well, this men and women getting married is this traditional thing, and it violates purity. And a lot of people see men kissing and think, well, to use a technical term, it's icky, right? They'll go, so they have those feelings. And so for liberals, it's clear that the support for gay marriage, perfectly reasonable. For conservatives, it's a much more ambivalent relationship. And you don't pursue legislation necessarily for things you feel ambivalent about. So even if there isn't homophobia, even some strong feeling against it, right, there's still this sense of, it doesn't quite work for me, right? And of course, it does sometimes fuel itself into things like homophobia, and that's what morality does, right? So you take these different people, see the same kind of issues, they apply a different morality to it, and once you start viewing things in moral terms, it starts to dial the temperature up. Everything gets more serious, right? It's more about right and wrong, and we know that moral discussions very often will have that kind of hot flavor. Let me give you an example of one. This is actually Andrew Breitbart, and he's yelling at Occupy Wall Street protesters. So just take a look and listen to this for a second.
Behave yourself! Behave yourself! Behave yourself! Behave yourself! Behave yourself! Behave yourself! You are freaks and animals! You're freaks and animals! Behave yourself! Behave yourself! Behave!
Racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots, go away!
Anti-gay yourself! Behave yourself! Learn to behave yourself, sir! Stop raping people! Stop raping people! Stop raping! Stop raping people! Stop raping the people! You freaks! You filthy freaks! You filthy, 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 raping, murdering freaks!
I've never raped anybody. I don't know who he's talking to.
That's my favorite reaction.
I've never raped anybody.
So to me, this is sort of the culture war in a nutshell, right? Where these two sides are yelling at each other, and their values, these sort of moral foundations, are clearly sort of revealing themselves. So Andrew Breitbart saying, behave yourself. You're freaks and animals. You're filthy, right? You're not showing proper respect for authority. What are you protesting for? You're an angry mob, right? You're not doing things the right way, and you're sort of animalistic. You're dirty. You're filthy. You're raping people. Right, so that's sort of the authority and purity dimensions coming out. The other side, this kind of classic chant that you hear at lots of protests: racist, sexist, anti-gay, right-wing bigots go away. It's all about fairness, right? It's about fairness and harm. There's certain oppressed people that are being oppressed. They're being hurt, and you're not treating them fairly. And that sort of dimension, these sides, that it just fuels itself, and these sides start fighting and screaming at each other. And that's what moralization does. It infuses debates with emotion. Opponents become not just people who you disagree with, but people who are sacrilegious, right? It leads to this demonization that you're evil, you're bad, right? It's not just that we disagree, it's that your views are bad, and that's what turns these teams into tribes, right? When you take a team and you infuse it with morality, a moral righteousness, right? Then you get this sort of this tribal mentality where there's these totems, these things that you have to pay homage to, and you see the same dimensions. Again, in the Kavanaugh hearings, you see the same kind of thing. Your Kavanaugh is not properly, sensitized to the oppressed people that he's dealing with, in the liberal view and the conservative view, right? He's just, you guys are an angry mob. Why can't you act right? Why can't you act normally? And so this is what you get. You get this first step in all this is this the whole thing gets energized with moral debate. And it comes out of these natural differences, right? But those natural differences can also be torqued up, right? They can be infused with more energy. So that's moralization. What I really love about that McEnroe story, what I think is so why I show that video, right, is that it shows how you want to have proof for your positions, right? So he says you could just have a situation where he's saying, well, that ball's in, and the other person's saying it's out. He says, well, that's your opinion, it's in. Well, it's your opinion, it's out. Okay, great, what do we do? He's going, no, there was proof. You saw the powder. You saw the chalk fly up. There's data to support my view, right? And that's what people do. It's not enough to have this moral view. It then starts to make you harness data support for your view to turn those sort of moral opinions into moral facts, things that are backed up by some kind of evidence. And that's this factualization process. And so let me tell you, just to give you a few examples of this, right? So if I asked you what your political moral views are, you would probably tell me a story that had something to do with reason. And your principles. So you would say, well, the reason I have my political beliefs is because I have a certain set of principles, and then I look at the facts of the world, and I use logic, and I come up, and that's why I'm a Democrat, or that's why I'm a Republican, right? Because I process this information and decide. Well, an overwhelming amount of social psychological research suggests that very often that process goes in precisely the other way. Right? So people have intuitions, they have beliefs, they have things that are already there, and then they recruit principles and facts and logic to support the things that they already believe, the things that they feel deeply. Very often, particularly if they feel that they're right? So your political beliefs can shape the way you see and interpret the world, and people then recruit these principles, facts, logic to turn these opinions, to give some data, to put some meat on the bones of their opinions. And it's a really interesting, it's kind of it's a reverse engineering of reality. We don't use the evidence to come to an opinion. We do that, right? But we also use our opinion to sort out the evidence. Let me talk about this idea of principle. Let me just kind of give you a couple examples of all these things. So this is one way to kind of ground your beliefs, some opinion that you have, and make it like a fact to say it's a matter of principle, damn it. I don't have anything against this Kavanaugh guy, right, or anything against Ford, but there's a principle at stake here. It's innocent until proven guilty, right? And that's the principle, and that makes it feel like a fact, right? That's not something that people just, I just didn't make this up. I have this principle, right? Now, the problem with that, right, is that people have these principles, and politicians love to present themselves as people of principle, right? But they selectively allocate those principles, and people call them on it. So in this case, he's saying, well, this is a matter of principle, and they're saying, well, they're essentially accusing the reject Kavanaugh person as kind of just making it up. Of course, liberals will flip that the other way, and they'll say, oh yeah, the same people who said lock her up now are saying innocent until proven guilty. So you're using your principle, you're innocent until proven guilty principle here, but you're abandoning it here. And that's what people do, and we love to do that, right? That's political hypocrisy. If you listen to political discourse, that's one of the things people get called on all the time. You're a hypocrite. You said this now, but you didn't do that. If Democrats did that, you'd be having a cow, right? So they will use this hypocrisy to call each other on their own hypocrisy. The reason that's so easy is because people are so hypocritical, right? They just switch principles all the time. Now, let me just give you a little bit of, I've got tons and tons of data on this, so I'll give you an example. This is about the principle of free speech, right? We think, oh yeah, people should have free speech. And we took a group of participants and we gave them 2 examples of free speech. So half of them read about a Muslim protester who was burning an American flag and proclaiming America evil. The other half read about a Christian protester showing cartoons of Muhammad and proclaiming that Islam is evil. Those are both sort of classic free speech sort of issues, but they kind of cut different ways politically. You'll see this theme. This is the way a lot of this research does. You take the same situation, you kind of create a bizarro version of it so that it appeals to either liberals or conservatives, and you see how they respond. In this case, what you see, and these are, again, liberal and conservative participants. So when it's flag burning, liberals are thinking, oh yeah, this is how much they endorse free speech, even if it's offensive to some. So free speech is particularly important for liberals if it's flag burning, not so much for conservatives. But if you go over to the Muhammad cartoon, conservatives think, oh yeah, you got to be able to show the cartoon. Again, you're not supposed to show depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. And this was an issue many years ago, right? So conservatives are much more likely to pull free speech out as an issue there and not so much, right? And liberals not so much. So people just, so you don't go from principle to conclusion, people go from conclusion and they pull out a principle. You might think, oh yeah, so these are just a bunch of people saying this. Well, you can show the same thing on the Supreme Court. So this is a wonderful analysis done by Lee Epstein, who's a legal scholar. And this is an analysis of free speech case decisions in the Supreme Court over the last few years. And so, again, some free speech cases are conservative free speech, like things like religious freedom. Others of them are more liberal free speech, things like whistleblowers, things that appeal more to liberal sensibilities. And when you look and see at their cases, you would think many people will say free speech is this fundamental principle. Well, if you look at the conservatives, they're much more likely to decide in favor of free speech if it's conservative speech than if it's liberal speech. And the liberal justices show the opposite sort of pattern, right? So even these people, these 9 people who are supposed to be the smartest, the fairest, the most objective, will pull these principles out in this selective fashion. And this is what happens, right? We say, I believe this, and it's true because it's a matter of principle. And you find them in a different situation, they'll flip around. Jon Stewart made his entire living on this for 20 years, showing people doing, just showing these hypocritical switches that people show, right? So this is matter. So one way people do this is they ground their judgments in principle, right? And they find that, so it's a principled judgment. More generally what we do, right, is we just pull in evidence. We take in evidence that supports our political beliefs and tend to believe it, and evidence that that doesn't support our political beliefs, we tend to reject. Let me give you, how many people have been in this situation? You're on your computer, some Facebook post comes up with some friend of yours, you go, oh, that's crazy, that's just so wrong. And to challenge your political beliefs, you go, I know that's not true. You go to Snopes.com, you check it, right, and you find out, and you send this message off saying that it's wrong. Anybody been in that situation? Anybody been in the opposite situation? You share something really quickly, and you go, oh, somebody comes back and says, you know, that's not true, right? That is sort of a microcosm process of the process I want to talk about. So this is an example just like that. This is Dinesh DSouza, well-known conservative activist. This is in 2015. He found this picture of Hillary Clinton. He says, look closely at this Hillary photo. Isn't that a Confederate flag behind her? So he shares this on Twitter, right? Within a half an hour or something, people come back and say, look, you know, that's obviously a fake. So there is no, so somebody just put that conservative or that Confederate flag in there, right? But he shared it just like other people do. And this is exactly sort of the problem, or it captures the more fundamental sort of psychological process, which is something that I talked about years ago, what I call motivated skepticism. That people tend to be skeptical of things they don't want to believe. So you check Snopes.com for things that challenge your political beliefs, things that support your political beliefs, you just share them, right? It's obviously true, seems true to me, you go through the process. And that general process of sort of just taking in information uncritically when it supports us, right? And being more critical when it doesn't, that sort of is, that goes on all over the place, right? So it's not just on Facebook. This is the same way that we think about almost everything. So here, there's a whole bunch of studies just like this. So this is a study that shows how people do the same thing in science. So you take this is a classic design in social psychology. You take a scientific study. In this case, it's about whether the death penalty deters crime or not, whether it deters murder, right? And it's a scientific study. It's got a methodology. People read it, and they just flip the results around, right? So they just take the results and they change the results, same methodology, change the results so that they either say that the death penalty deters crime or it doesn't deter crime. And then you have people whose preconceptions are already there, whether they're liberal or conservative opponents of capital punishment or proponents of it. And you ask them, how good is that study? Is that a good study? Tell me about the methodology. And what you get is, again, if it's an anti-deterrent study, liberals think this is just how good the study is. Liberals think it's a good study. Conservatives say, oh no, there's some real flaws in that. Pro-deterrent study, oh, there's some real flaws in that. Liberals say, conservatives say it's a good study. It's the same study, right? It's exactly, because of the experimental design, they're reading exactly the same methodology. It's a good study if it supports what you want to believe. It's a bad study if it doesn't support with what you want to believe, right? That's the process. You just keep taking things in that you want to believe, right, uncritically, and things that you don't, you reject. Same thing happens with logic. Let me just say that these partisan motivations can affect the way people think about logic. So we did a study where we presented people with a whole bunch of these logical syllogisms, right? You may remember this from your Logic 101 class. So there are two premises and a conclusion. Things that harm the economy, burden job creators, taxes increase tax increases burden job creators, tax increases harm the economy. Programs that help the economy help unemployed find jobs. Welfare programs help unemployed to find jobs. Welfare programs help the economy. And some of these were logical, some were illogical. These actually happen to be invalid syllogisms. I don't know if anybody knows why. Yeah, I know. It's called affirming the consequence. So these would actually be valid if it says things that harms the economy burden job creators, tax increases harm the economy, tax increases burden job creators. That's logical. When you flip them around, that's not, it's a classic logical fallacy, right? And the question is, are people, in this case, are people sensitive to this? Now, the difference is these are exactly the same logical structure. They just have, one has a conservative-friendly conclusion, that tax increases harm the economy. The other one has the welfare programs help the economy, a liberal-friendly conclusion. And you ask people, do they get it right? Well, liberals, when you give them the top one, they get that one right. They're much more likely to, they figure out, oh yeah, that's not logical. Conservatives miss it, right? You might say, okay, well, liberals are better at logic. Well, then you flip exactly the same thing around, and all of a sudden liberals get it wrong, and conservatives get it right. Right? So things that support your beliefs seem like they're logically derived, right? So even at this level of logic, that your partisan bias changes, you may have the sense that, oh, those people on the other side, they're so illogical. Yeah, they seem illogical together, right? And that's because of the way you process the information. Now, one question that may come up I want to just talk about briefly is, in all of these things you see I've got showing basically the same phenomenon on the left and the right, but you might wonder, well, who's more biased, right? Is one side particularly biased in this, right? If you ask most partisans, they'll say, yeah, the other side's more biased. Our side's rational, their side's biased. We've done that, and that's exactly what people say. But there's a whole sort of psychological legacy to this. It goes all the way back to what's called the authoritarian personality research in the 1950s, trying to associate conservatism with bias. That conservatives have this defensive, rigid style, and they're going to be particularly biased. More recently, lots of people have made the argument that liberals and conservatives, anybody that has political motivations is going to be biased, and that you get kind of these mirror image biases in liberals and conservatives. So we tried to actually get some sense of this by looking at all the different studies that were kind of like this, right? So there's a whole bunch of studies like this in the world where we get exactly the same information, or very close to the same information presented to people, then you just flip around whether it's liberal or conservative. And what we wanted to sort of get a sense of is who's more biased. Well, how do you index bias? Well, it's kind of how differently they respond to the same thing, right? So if exactly the same information is perceived differently when it's friendly to your politics or not, right, then that's bias. To the extent that you rate them similarly, that's not bias. And so what we did is we simply calculated those differences all for as many studies as we could find to see is there some tendency for one side of the political aisle to be more biased in these sort of really highly controlled situations than others. And what we found 51 studies, over 18,000 people that you went through these matched information designs. And what you see is, again, going this way is more accepting of liberal information than conservative, more accepting of conservative than liberal information. And what you see is that everybody's biased in their direction. So conservatives rate the information as better information if it supports their beliefs than if it doesn't. Liberals do the same thing, and they both do it to virtually the identical degree, right? Now, don't get me wrong about this isn't a study about what kind of bias is out in the world, right, or in political discourse, right? It's not a media analysis. It's an analysis under sort of bias in a vacuum. And what it tells you is that everybody's susceptible to this. This is the most natural thing in the world, right? Is to take information that supports what you want to believe, supports your side. We tend to be easier on it. We're easier on things on people on our team than we are on the other team, right? It's a natural. Everybody's got that vulnerability, right? It's a natural human tendency that can be used and exploited as well. Everybody knows about, finally, let me talk a little bit about socialization, this last step in the process, right? Everybody's heard of Wikipedia? Sort of culturally stored knowledge. In fact, it's very much like that. Everybody contributes, right? It's kind of an example of what we know as a culture. Did you know that there's also a Conservativepedia? A whole website where you can go and it has conservative facts, right? Because they don't like the facts in Wikipedia, and there should be some different ones, right? And that sort of captures this idea of socialization. Once you have these moral differences. They fuel you to process the information differently, and then you go to your respective worlds, and then you get validated, right? So socialization, I mean socialization in very much the same way any sociologist would use it. You learn the norms and values and beliefs of a culture, but what we do now is that we go to different places and learn different cultural beliefs and values, and those individual beliefs that you may have then get stamped in and socialized by everybody else seems to believe it too, right? So I always say that I grew up in a 3-channel world. That there was NBC, ABC, CBS. You might believe something really crazy. You might hear something very crazy during the day. And what you did is you went home and Walter Cronkite told you whether you were right or wrong. And he told you the truth. Right now, what you do is you go to there's thousands of places to go. You can go to somebody who looks just like Walter Cronkite and will tell you that whatever crazy thing you just heard is probably true, right? So it's a fundamentally different media environment where people can go and become sort of ensconced in their own world. And there's 2 different effects I want to talk about. One is this idea of selective exposure and group polarization, that people just naturally tend to go to media and go to people who are likely to agree with them. Right, and so you've got, if you are a liberal, you can go to Good Morning America, the New York Times, MSNBC, and find information you want. If you're a conservative, you can go to Fox and Friends and the Wall Street Journal and Washington Times and whatever, and find out the things that you want. Right, so you may have some belief, and you go and you have a bunch of very reasonable people also believe that there's nothing more powerful than sort of stamping in beliefs than that, right? It even happens at the level of residential sorting. People tend to live, right, increasingly in enclaves of liberal and conservative, right? So they don't really see other people. And then when similar minds are together, they tend to both reinforce each other and polarize each other. So it pulls people apart. So these beliefs that you may have, they go and they get socialized in you and pulled apart. Just a couple, this is a wonderful, I just did it because I like the picture. This is an analysis of tweets and retweeting political moral information. You can see what happens is people just, liberals just retweet among themselves. It just echoes. Conservatives just retweet among themselves. There's very few links the other way around, right? So even in these new media, it works out. There has been a change, though. Let me show you. I just want to really quickly see if I can go through these data. This is a student of mine who did an analysis using Pew data of selective exposure. So there's a whole bunch of math involved in this, but the idea is that this is an index of how much you pay attention to your own media rather than other media. You sort of selectively put yourself in media of your own political views. And how it changed from 2000 to 2012. And what you can see is it's clearly going up, right? So you get this nice increase in people becoming more ensconced in their own media. And here, from this, it looks like, well, Republicans do this a little bit more than Democrats do. Coming back to this issue, right? So maybe Republicans are more sort of wrapped up in their own world than Democrats are. But if you look at when he broke it out by extremity of the views from very liberal and very conservative, what you see is this really interesting pattern where the people that are really different are the extreme conservatives. They're the ones that are increasingly becoming ensconced in their own media world. And actually, regular conservatives are at the lowest end. They're the lowest of all the selective exposure. They're showing the most balanced media diet, right? So again, it says there's this group of people, this extreme conservatives who are starting to really put themselves in a place where they're not hearing other views, right? And that brings me to this last little effect that I want to talk about with socialization. It's this idea of fact inoculation, right? And this is what happens when you find yourself in your own world. So an example I always give is, there's been several polls that said Fox News is the most trusted media source, right? Interestingly, if you ask people, it's also the least trusted media source. That tells you everything, right? So we have media that we trust and media that we don't trust, because they tell you we're fair and balanced, we're the best damn news team in television, which means those guys suck. You can't trust what they say. That's the implication, right? And so what you get is that our media is fair and accurate. Their media is full of fake news. It's biased, right? I can disregard it because I don't trust you, right? And if you don't, that's the most effective thing you can do with motivated reasoning. If you don't trust somebody, you can just, anything I hear, it doesn't matter how plausible it is, oh, you're just lying, right? And to the extent you can create mistrust of a certain kind of media, right, that's really powerful as a tool to kind of control information. We see that naturally, right? There's this natural sense in which the other side is always drinking the Kool-Aid, and you get these kind of nice mirror image impressions, right? But, right, this is something that can be manipulated as well, and we're seeing it manipulated. This idea that then you can hear those facts, and you're inoculated against them because you just can say, that's fake news, that's media that I don't want to believe. So we have these three processes. So we're just, right, there's the two groups, and it's as if they sort of view each other through this lens, through this partisan looking glass, right? And the partisan looking glass is composed of genuine moral differences. So we really have these liberals and conservatives have different moral views, right? They get torqued up. Those then drive bias, right? So you want to believe your moral views are correct. You process the information. Now your moral views seem even more correct because they're supported by facts. And then they get stamped in by the media. You go back home, you watch TV that tells you you're right. The people you know, your neighbors tell you you're right. And this sort of fuels this whole thing where that just makes you more angry, right? Is that if somebody believes something very strongly that you believe just as strongly isn't true, it makes you mad. And if you're mad, well, then you're mad at them, and they're either dumb or they're lying, and it just fuels the whole process, right? So through this lens, you get this extremitization where both sides see each other as these evil figures, right? And it has all these cascading effects, right? So you have these misperceptions and partisan animosity. It fuels that. Alternative facts, this idea that these Euronews must be fake, and we've got different factual beliefs. That leads to dysfunctional government. People can't get along. They hate each other. Nobody compromises. Nobody negotiates. And you get dysfunctional government. When you get dysfunctional government, you get anger. People get mad at the government. They lose trust in the institutions. And they very often will either not vote or turn to populist leaders who tell them, oh, we're outsiders. We can tell you something different, right? Now, and the thing I want to note, right, is these are perfectly natural processes. Any sort of moral group like this is going to tend in this direction, right? It tends to make you mad when somebody has a different moral view, right? It's going to bias. The bias processing is a perfectly reasonable thing, right? Hanging out with people who already believe what you believe, it's a perfectly normal thing. But those things can be exploited. They can be weaponized, right? You can sow the division. You can make that division so that people hate each other more. When they hate each other more, they're going to bias. They're going to process things more biasedly, and then it's all going to heat itself up. So these are natural things that happen, but they can also be exploited by political leaders, right? And this is what we're in. This is sort of the cycle that we're in right now, this sort of outrage spiral, in a sense, where you get partisan animosity, where people really dislike people on the other side. They think they're wrong, their values are misguided, I don't like them. That fuels them to see the world in a certain way. Oh, yeah, the world's that way. My world is the one that's supported, your world is wrong, and now I'm mad at you. Now I get more partisan animosity, I get more bias, and the whole thing cycles through, right? Where and it's a hot, conflict-driven process and that's what, in terms of solutions, and I think I'm gonna not go over all these different solutions that I talked about, and rather just do this in discussion, but there's ways, what I want to tell you, in order to get out of this, right, it's like, another way to describe it is, how many people have had two kids fighting in the back seat of their car? All right? That doesn't end spontaneously, right? You ask, well, what's going on back there? Well, he hit me first. Well, he hit me harder. Everybody's aggrieved. Everybody keeps beating each other up, and it just gets worse until somebody goes back there, right? Somebody's got to go back there to stop it. That's the situation we're in, right? Somebody's got to fix this. And what I think is a lot of solutions that people talk about try to solve this, say, oh, there's ways of processing information that are better. That's not going to work very well in the context of this partisan animosity. It's like trying to start a mediation during a bar fight, right? It's a lot of what I want to talk about is how to turn the temperature down. Right? We have to figure out ways that somehow if we could turn the temperature down, then the bias would get better as well. And there's things like third parties, lessening the influence of money. The congressional work week is a really interesting idea, is that the congressmen don't live together anymore. They don't hang out together anymore. When Newt Gingrich came in 1992 to be Speaker of the House, the first thing he did was, it was sort of in this whole context where you got to go out and get money, and Washington's the problem, so he shortened the congressional work week to 3 days so they could go back to living, to be in their districts. So they stopped living in Washington. For a long time, they went to the same schools together. They hung out together. It's hard to demonize somebody who you went to a soccer game with yesterday, right? But if you've never seen them, then all they are is this demon, this devil. And, so something like if we could get them to sort of hanging out together, at least has some potential to help solve the problem. At an individual level, what I think the key is this sort of intellectual humility. Right? If we just could realize we're all biased, we all don't know very much about things. It's this sort of hubris, really, that drives a lot of this. So I would say search for diverse media information, fact-check things, and fact-check things that are too good to be true. When you need a fact check or things that you want to believe, and that's sort of the problem with the fake news problem, right? What the Russian influence was, and what they try to do is they flood the zone with information that you want to believe. All the terrible things that Hillary did, or all the terrible things that Trump did. And so people don't check those, right? Because they're good. They make them feel good. If you can do that and check those, and then do this kind of shoe on the other foot test. Would I believe the same thing in this situation if you switch the party to the people? Would I believe you should treat your own party like you treat the other party, in a sense, right? They should, if the shoe doesn't go on the other foot, then you're in trouble. There's lots of other solutions to talk about. None of them are, I will say, I am not optimistic in the short run, right? This is those kids fighting in the backseat, it's gonna fuel itself. And there is one last solution that I think everybody should consider, and everybody can, which is vote. And thanks for listening. These are my collaborators of various kinds. I appreciate you coming out, and I'm happy to take questions. John Bellum X.
Thanks. This is incredible. Thank you for this, Pete. And I think one thing that's happening is that I feel like some of this thinking about motivated reasoning is actually entering the discourse a little bit, where I feel like people will say that you're only asserting this belief because of your motive. Like, I don't even think you really believe what you're saying right now. And so I feel like that there's kind of almost like a meta level to this that's emerging. But to me, like, one of the potential solutions to this is when your belief, talk is cheap, right? So when your beliefs convert to behavior, other than just asserting what your beliefs are you actually practicing what you preach? Has any, has any of the work in this domain kind of looked at the translation of beliefs into action? And do these same biases apply to sort of the behaviors that people exhibit? Like, for example, I might have a strong belief about health equity. I don't volunteer anytime, right, in social organizations. Perhaps my belief isn't as strong as I thought it was. So is there anything kind of looking at the conversion of beliefs to behaviors, and might that improve the discourse by kind of validating the trueness of those beliefs?
Interesting. So, do these things translate into behavior? And I'm just trying to sort of recapture the question here. I mean, the huge problem in politics is that nothing translates into behavior. People just sit in their house and they rant and they rail and they fume and they're angry, and then they don't go to vote, or they don't help, right? So that is a problem. And again, I think but the feelings are real, and they're the things that actually, they very often will drive people not to vote, right? So there's a lot of this sort of disgust that people get with the political system. The Congress is rated as less popular than dog poop and Nickelback, right? In that order, I think. But, right, I mean, it can drive people away. It doesn't very often drive people too, but one thing that does engage action is morality. And this is why people do it. So fear of the other, right? Feeling aggrieved, like I'm wrong, that drives behavior better, and there's fairly good evidence for that, right? And that's why we want to dabble in this realm of morality, because morality, if you can harness it, right, can turn beliefs into action much better than some pragmatic, oh yeah, this is the better policy, this economic policy is likely to increase my salary by this much, right? People just, that isn't as motivating as morality, and that's why it's infused. It happens naturally, but it's also torqued up and can be used effectively that way.
So last night, many of us may have went to Steven Pinker's talk here. Some of you might have seen that. And kind of his thing that he was really, putting out there was the importance of reason and humanism, and how everything should just be logic and reason, and that's how we should come to our conclusions and behave and make progress in human history. And so, I of course know, some of your work in this area and in others, and it's like, I guess my question is, can we ever really get to that point? Even if we do some of those solutions, even if we try to take it upon ourselves to fact check, if we know that the facts themselves are becoming so biased by which fact checking site we even go to, how can we ever kind of get to this pure reason? Or is there anything that's kind of devoid of this bias? Or are there any of these strategies that can get us there? Or is it just always going to be infected with this motivated reasoning, and there is no kind of pure reason that we can even get to with effort?
That's a good question. So Steven Pinker's book is called Enlightenment Now, I think is what it's called. It's about the Enlightenment. There's a reason why there was an Enlightenment. There's a reason why Steven Pinker is trying to bring it back. It's because it doesn't take very well. It's not natural for humans, right? So this fact-value distinction, that people have values, they have things that they like and don't like, and then they have facts. People blur those all the time. That's what all this research is. They believe that things are morally right are going to be practically effective. If something's morally wrong, it can't be right. They have trouble separating those things out, that the world should work out that way, right? And so it's a real uphill climb to get people to, so you say, well, you shouldn't pay attention to whether this reflects well on your party or not. Wow, people try, but it's hard for them to do it. It's just not a natural strategy, right? And so that's why the Enlightenment came and tried to say, no, this is gonna be cool. You're gonna like this, right? So that's a problem. And of course, the other problem is that we very often equate bias with not thinking, right? But as I like to say, bias isn't the sole province of the simple-minded, right? Smart people can be really biased, and being smart can make you really biased. If you're not paying attention to it, it allows you, it gives you the ammunition, right? If you ever argued with somebody of the other political persuasion who's really smart, man, they really give you a run for your money, and you know that they're wrong. You're missing some things, but they're so clever about doing it. So brains, it's really difficult to get people to converge on the truth. One thing that actually does it pretty well, there's some evidence for this, is incentives. If there's an incentive, if people there's been little studies done, you give them these sort of political bias things, and you pay them off for, economists do these studies, you pay them off for the right answer, right? People will do better. They're less biased in that situation if you pay them off, right? And you say, well, there's the solution, right? Well, that's, in fact, but it points more to the problem, right? The problem is the incentive structure in politics is completely perverse, right? All the incentives are for partisanship and bias, right? So if you're a senator, the way you get ahead is by going with your party and be loyal to your party. If you're own a cable news network, you don't want a bunch of people calmly talking about things, right? You want conflict. You want the sides fighting. You want them to do this. Everybody's money is in, and because conflict also creates votes, right? It turns beliefs into behaviors because it harnesses people, right? So you want the conflict. So all of the incentives in politics, and with the huge amount of money, the incentives are huge, right, are all towards sort of driving people apart. And it's tough for people to reason under those situations where they kind of have a natural loyalty, and it's also reinforced by all the incentive structure, right? And so that's part of the problem. It's hard to figure out, how do we incentivize rational, reasonable, nuanced thought? So, Alice, go ahead.
Thanks. Can you give some recommendations on where we should go for the facts? So you mentioned diverse media. If we wanted to sample diverse media, can you give us a collection of things that we should be looking at or listening to?
There's been some, yeah, there's been some really, so she asked whether I can give examples of media. There's some really wonderful analyses of that kind of capture who's the most biased, who's the most fact-based. Actually, I probably even have a chart like that somewhere in my slides. And the thing that I always tell people is that institutionalized media are the best places to go. There's places that, in fact, where the incentive structure is for accuracy, right? So these old institutions, newspapers, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, I mean, these places where there's an incentive to be accurate, right? In much of the media, there's no incentive to be accurate. It's all just whatever you want. And so those you're much more like, even on, if you go to Fox News, the news, they're very harnessed to reality. They talk about things, they may spin it differently, and there really is a sense the liberal media is liberal, right? There's a mainstream media has sort of they tend to have liberal values. They'll give you the facts and then they'll twist them a little bit. The core of Fox News, the news people will do the same thing. They'll give you the basic facts and then they'll twist them a little bit. Right now, the opinion people on either side are so unhinged, and people don't process those well. That's why I say you should be investing in I would give, every time I used to avoid these, the Washington Post wants money on my phone, they want this thing, I give them money, right? It's like invest in your local newspaper, invest in media that has some incentives to get to some accurate answer and away from these kind of opinion people who are just there kind of stir things up. Kev, go ahead.
I'm interested in this meta-analysis that you did on confirmation bias on the partisanship side. So what you showed was that the magnitude of the bias was approximately equal in the two groups. Mm-hmm. But you went to the conclusion that there was no difference between the two groups, which actually requires more information. The correlation coefficients were approximately the same size, but we really want to know, so this is a very technical question, sorry. You want to really know the difference in the correlation coefficients and the error on that value to know whether there's there's an actual difference in the bias level.
So it's statistically it's a non-statistically significant difference, right? And you can look at it all kinds of different ways. We looked at both the measure of the difference and then summed up the things and then looked at the difference. There's different ways of doing it. It's all based on power. It's 51, these are in a meta-analysis, 51 studies. With more, that may be bigger. I'm not, and this is what I talk about the meta-analysis. It's not, if one side's a little more biased than the other, we might pick that up. I think really the thrust point that you want to make is both sides have this tendency. Right, one side, there may very well be situations, and it looks like in the real world, right, there's things that go on that can make one side more biased for a while, the other side more biased for a while. But I think if liberals, in particular, want to look out and say, oh, there's these crazy conservatives, they're off the rails, we would never be like that, I think that's a dangerous thing to think. I think everybody has that natural tendency. All these things are completely natural sort of social and psychological processes. They can be harnessed, they can metastasize, they can be weaponized in various ways to pull those things apart. I think that whether you can find a little bit of a difference, I think the key thing to walk away from that meta-analysis with is everybody does this. Everybody kind of takes in information they want to believe easier than information they don't want to believe. We got one more, or? Well, let's go here. Judy.
Thanks for the talk. That was. Can you go back to the very first slide where it had the 5 values that are principles?
Oh, I don't know. Let me see. Is
that too hard?
Keep talking.
Okay, so basically what I was thinking is that the presentation that the president gives is something that is offensive to a lot of the things that conservatives believe in, right? Being polite to other people, not going after powerful people, not going after unpowerful people. The way you conduct yourself in a social setting. All of these things are tradition that conservatives value. But yet you see conservatives, a lot of conservative support for President Trump. So Purity. I don't think we can attribute purity to the way that he conducts himself. Authority, he's, well, I don't know. Maybe if you say whoever's president should be the authority,
really
and so maybe that one doesn't. In group, I mean, he goes after anybody that is not in accord with him at the moment, right? So I'm just thinking that there's a lot of things that are being violated among these values, and yet you still see the strong support.
That's a wonderful point. There's probably a really long answer that I won't, or I don't know if it's an answer. We could talk about it. It's so interesting, right? Is that these things, they're natural things that you can tell that they're real in a sense that people use them. So Trump harnesses those things like tradition, like, oh, men are being attacked. And I mean, he tries to get you to think that way. He tries to get you to think about the liberals as a violent mob of people that are kind of animalistic and they're not refined. That's not traditional. That's not the way you behave. So he uses those things, and then you can see that the motivated reasoning is such a powerful thing that you can take the same thing and twist it around, right? You can take this thing and say, well, if I'm a high in authority, I should be loyal to a president, right? No matter who the president is. That's what you think. But, well, this president isn't really legitimate, so I respect real presidents, but I don't respect this president. You can play those games, and it's so, in a sense, what's going on now is a test case of motivated reasoning. I wouldn't have thought that it could be so powerful, quite honestly. And I've studied this my whole life, right? The bounds, people have preferences, those affect their judgment, but they're also tethered to reality. People have some boundaries, right? And its question is, where do you hit that boundary? How implausible can things become if you just want to believe them before you believe them? And it seems that envelope is wider and broader and more dangerous than I thought. So thanks very much, everybody. I'm here. Anybody else wants to ask a question?
To that, because I think that's such an important point. And it does seem to me something of interest is how fear and emotion might shift your priorities, because fear, I'm a psychologist as well, will make you privilege in-group and authority. So if you think about it, part of the strategy is what emotions you trigger, and it'll be less likely to trigger harm, fairness, or even purity. So I think that was just a fantastic talk, and everybody will vote, I'm sure, and thank you all for coming. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you.